Welcome to Health Coach for Women, a podcast where we explore alternative and holistic solutions to better health and wellness through intentional living. Now, here's your host, Marsha Roopchand-Walker.
Are you experiencing workplace conflict, hostility at work? Maybe your supervisor is micromanaging you. Maybe you need to be managed. I don't know. Let's talk about that. Thank you so much for joining me again on another episode. I thank you for your support. But this was on my mind. I wanted to talk about this because, we see this a lot in the workplace, right? Managing conflict in the workplace, or where people feel a lot of times they're frustrated, annoyed, or feel like their managers are hard to deal with, your supervisors or whatever. So I wanted to talk about that today. All right. But first, before we get started, hit that like button, share, and subscribe. And of course, I always have a quote for you. All right. The quality of our lives depends not on whether or not we have conflicts, but on how we respond to them. And that's by Thomas Crum. All right. So let us jump right in. So what is workplace conflict and why does it happen? All right. So we know that workplace conflict is some type of disagreement or dispute between either employees, right, co-workers, either managers, supervisors, and even teams, right? This happens. And it can arise from a number of reasons, right? It can come about for a number of reasons. And that's include personality clashes, right? Personality clashes. We have people who have various personalities, right? And various working styles. Also, either lack of communication, right? Lack of communication where there's can lead to misunderstandings, right? Sometimes leadership conflicts, all right? It could be leadership conflict. It could be, where some people lack poor leadership skills, poor managerial or supervisor skills, right? We see this a lot, okay? So we see this a lot. So there's various reasons why there can be conflict in the workplace. But the goal is, how could we avoid them? And when we can avoid them, how can we deal with them? How can we deal with the conflict effectively, right? And so there are 5 conflict styles, right? One is avoidance, right? Which that's pretty much self-explanatory, right? Where you just avoid that person, right? As much as possible. You have accommodation, competition, compromise, and collaboration. So let me explain a little further. All right, accommodation. Like I said, that's self-explanatory, right? So avoidance is basically when the issue doesn't require, or which someone may feel does not need immediate attention, or also if emotions are too high and a person needs time to cool off. And when confronting conflict might cause more harm than good, especially if you're someone who have a bad temper, right? So that's why sometimes you need to cool off or whatever. So let's go over the pros and cons, right? The pros are prevents unnecessary conflict over minor issues and gives time to process the emotions before responding. Some of the cons are problems can build up over time, leading to bigger issues, and can be seen as passive or disengaged behavior. All right. The other one is accommodation, lose-win, right? So this is when you yield to the other person's needs or demands, often at the expense of your own. So when is it used? When maintaining harmony is more important than the issue itself. And you can see that sometimes people just don't want to deal with conflict at all because for some people it's very, very sensitive, and it's something where it can really, really impact someone in a negative way, right? And so that person will just maintain the harmony uh, and and disregard what they're feeling and what they wish to express. So when there's another time is it used when the other person needs or position is stronger. Another time is to preserve relationships when you realize you're wrong. Okay. So some pros is, okay, it can help maintain workplace relationship. It can also prevent unnecessary tension over minor disagreements, right? Minor disagreements. But what are some of the cons? It can lead to resentment if you constantly give in, right? It can reinforce unhealthy workplace dynamics. So an example of that is maybe a team member accept an extra workload without objection because they don't want to create conflict with their boss. So they just go ahead and do it. So if this is happening over time, you can see where the resentment would come in, right? Another thing is competition, right? So assertively pursuing your own needs or position at the expense of others, right? So now we're talking about ourselves, right? So when a quick decision is needed, right? An example would be like some high stakes situations. So and another one is if you strongly believe in your stance and what you advocate and you want to advocate for it, right? And I know that I can be that way, right? So certain things I may strongly disagree on, strongly disapprove of the way things can be handled, right? Or the certain actions that's taken or not taken, right? It can be quite frustrating. All right. So you want to be able to speak about it. Sometimes it'll fall on deaf ears, right? And when authority or rules must be enforced, right? Some people don't like authority, but we need authority. We need reinforcements. We need structure, right? It's a part of structure and organization. But can sometimes people take things a little too far when it comes to maintaining authority? Sometimes, right? So it's like always this unwavering balance, right? But some pros can be effective when quick action is needed. Also, it shows confidence as well as assertiveness in critical situations, right? So the cons of this is that it can damage relationships, right? It can damage relationships if used excessively. And then when people, if perfect example is when you have a friend who is your supervisor and they're telling you to do something and you're telling them that you're not going to do it because you think because we're friends and you're my boss, no, you can let me slide. That's not how that works. Some people and relationships and friendships has ended over that same thing. That's not how that works. All right. So another example is where a manager can enforce a policy change without any employee input, right? We see this a lot in corporations, prioritizing efficiency over discussion, right? So you see that also. Another one is compromise, right? So it's win, lose, right? So finding some middle ground where both parties give up something to reach an agreement. I think that's fair, right? I think that's fair. So when is it used? When a solution is needed quickly and both sides are willing to make concessions. If a balanced approach is necessary to maintain fairness, right? And I'm always for justice being fair, right? You have to be fair, right? So some pros is that it can resolve conflicts efficiently, and it ensures that both parties have a say in the outcome. This is important. But what are some cons to that? Both sides may feel like they lost something. Okay. Mm, And they may not address the root cause of the conflict. That's important. We want to address the root cause of the conflict. All right. So, an example of that is two employees in a disagreement over a project or direction settle on a blended approach that incorporates elements of both perspectives, right? You want to see both perspectives, right? It's not a one-sided thing. Okay. So you can see where there can be some issues there, right? Now, the one that I really love is that collaboration which is the win-win. 4 isn't bad, but 5 is, I like the collaboration where you have a win-win solution, right? So working together to find a solution that fully satisfies both parties. This is good, right? So when is it used? When long-term relationships and teamwork are priorities, right? And if creative problem solving is needed. We need problem solving in a workplace, right? And when both parties are invested in a mutual outcome, right? And I'll just use healthcare, right? So I'll just say the RN and the nursing assistant, right? One may feel or both may feel that for whatever reason they may disagree or not share the same ideals on certain things, or feel like maybe the nursing assistant may feel like the nurse doesn't listen to them or the nurse doesn't communicate at all, right? There's so many different examples, and you see it a lot in healthcare, right? Sometimes nurses don't get along. Sometimes the nurses and the nursing assistants don't get along. Sometimes it's co-workers themselves don't get along, right? So because you have staff that work and you have staff that show up to work, right? There's a difference. Okay. So you see these things a lot. You see this a lot. So if you were to ask yourself which conflict style is the best, there's no single best resolution. But for me personally, I like compromise, right? I like compromise, as well as collaboration, right? You have to be willing to compromise, right? So number 4 and 5 could work again, but it's going to vary, right? Depending on the people and the situation. All right.
If you are struggling with health issues like chronic pain, being held back by past traumas, or feeling overwhelmed and hopeless, please know there is hope. There is help. Transcendence, a woman's guide to healing and self-love for better health, happiness, and abundance, is a blueprint to help you get your life back and reclaim your health. Within its pages, you'll learn how to elevate your existence by shifting your mindset toward the positive, focusing your energy on what's really important, using gratitude to feel deep appreciation, changing your gene expression through epigenetics, building resilience, and living in a state of flow, feeling love overflow within. Go beyond an ordinary life. Transcend. Buy it now.
So I wanted to touch on that. Now, let us look at one second. Let's see here. I'm pulling. I got my note. Everything I have is in my notes. All right. So let's look at identifying. We already talked about the conflict styles, right? Let's look at some de-escalation strategies for these high tension situations. And we know that most stress is what? Work related, right? It's work related. So how can we stay calm in the heat of the moment when maybe you feel like someone is being passive aggressive or they're doing maybe now putting notes around, when you have a supervisor that's putting notes around that you can't do this and you can't do that, rather than having a verbal conversation because they just avoid, right? Whether it's to avoid confrontation, whatever it is. or they lack communication, right? So how do we de-escalate? Of course, remaining calm, right, in the heat of the situation. Sometimes you may have to take a breather. Sometimes you may have to step out for a moment, right? Another thing is active listening, right? Active listening where you're able to diffuse tension. Sometimes you need a mediator in some situations. You really need a mediator, right? And where someone can listen without bias, right? Where someone can listen to both parties without bias. Sometimes that's necessary, right? If it gets to that level, if it gets that far. And the power of neutral language and tone in workplace discussions. Sometimes your tone can make a difference, right? Sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So your tone can make a world of difference, right? When you are speaking to other people. So if you are coming off with a harsh tone, you sound abrasive, the person receiving that can take that the wrong way, right? And you may not even mean it in a bad way. You may or you may not, because some people, that's how they talk. And it's something, is that acceptable because that's just the way I am? No. Yeah, that's something that you would need to work on, right? Especially when you're dealing with people in the workplace environment. Your family members may be used to it, but in a workplace environment, that's something totally different. They don't know you, you don't know them, right? Especially when you're in healthcare and you're dealing with talking to the residents' family members, right? So you have to be professional. You have to be able to stay calm. You have to be able to pay attention to your being self-aware, paying attention to your body language, listening to yourself and how you're talking, right? And so, how can we express our concerns without sounding aggressive or defensive by what I just said? Being self aware, paying attention to our tone and how we are speaking, and our own being conscious of our body language and our facial expressions, right? Sometimes our facial expressions can say so much, okay? And having that emotional intelligence, that is vital, that is crucial. Having emotional intelligence, right? Being able to manage those emotions, right? Accordingly. Sometimes people have an issue with that, right? You have to be able to manage those emotions efficiently. That's why it's important to resolve conflict and not let anything build up, because you begin to be resentful. And if that person say one wrong thing to you, you're gonna just go off on them, right? So we have to be mindful, right? We have to be mindful. We have to be emotionally intelligent, self-aware. We have to pay attention to ourselves. Again, that's going back to being self-aware. That's all a part of the self-awareness. So when to escalate and seek mediation. I'm sorry, I said meditation. Seek mediation. Again, I talked about this, right? Knowing when a situation may require a mediator, whether it's from HR or from some other department, whatever, right? Steps to document and report workplace issues professionally. Now, if you have an ongoing issue with the person and you see that communication is non-effective, right? There is no communication with that person, or things falls on deaf ears. You may want to go a little further, right? And you follow the chain of command, right? And you would go to the next level up, right? And I'll use health here, right, as a perfect example. So your immediate supervisor is your nurse on the floor. And if you're a nurse, then it would be to either speak to the ADON or the DON, right? And then it just goes from there. You got to make sure you are documenting situations where it can come back to bite you in the butt. Okay, so you want to make sure you are recording stuff, making sure You're making notations of certain situations, right? And you can recall back, hey, listen, I spoke with, I don't know, Nurse Majors on such and such a day. I told her about such and such. And she said she would do whatever, right? I brought it such and such to this person's attention, and it wasn't done. The family member said XYZ. Most of the time I'll use healthcare examples because that's the field that I'm in, right? So we have to make sure that we're doing that, right? If needed, right? Certain people, you do have to be very cautious, and you need to do that. So if that's what you need to do to CYA, then you have to do that. So how to advocate for yourself while keeping your career in mind. Now, I see this a lot, right? Especially in areas like the South and even here in Cleveland, like especially people who are old school and they've been here so long, like they're afraid to speak up, right? They don't say much. They just do as they're told, and they don't let their voices be heard, right? You can advocate for yourself. You can speak up for yourself, right? If you feel that you are being offended or disrespected, whether it's by a patient, a family member, another staff member, it needs to be addressed. You don't let that slide. It needs to be addressed. I, for one, make sure that I address these situations accordingly, right? So like I said, again, because you have some residents who are very disrespectful to staff in general, the ones who are taking care of you, right? Being disrespectful to the nurses, the nursing assistants, I mean, whoever's there. And you don't have to tolerate that, right? If you have to go and speak to the ADON, the DON, or even the director of the facility so that someone can address that individual, then you need to do that, because you should not have to tolerate disrespect, especially when you are not being disrespectful to that person. All right. So you have to be able to advocate for yourself. And this is all a part of your what? Part of your mental health, right? Because this stuff on a daily basis can take a toll. And so we don't want to do that. That's why you have to advocate for yourself. All right. And so remember everything that I talked about. If things are not addressed, it will continue to fester. So it has to be addressed. Okay. And I use that as an example because we actually had a resident that was very rude and disrespectful to nursing staff, aides, male and female, and it had to be addressed. So they did speak to him. And so things are better now. He's much better now. You have to do what you have to do, right? Your voice needs to be heard. And there's ways to speak, and there's ways to address things without being disrespectful, right? Without being abrasive and rude, right? But you could be stern and firm in what you believe and what you stand up for, because it does not need to be tolerated. And listen, maybe if you are the problem, if you are the issue, right? And maybe people are always coming to you about certain things. Maybe you need to self-reflect, right? Maybe you need to do that. I don't know. I'm just saying. We have to be able to take accountability for our own actions. We have to be able to take accountability, but we also need to hold people accountable. We also need to hold people accountable. Okay. So I just wanted to talk about that. All right. I just wanted to have that discussion. I was really at a blank. I was like, what do I want to talk? I want to talk about something that's relevant, right? That I've been seeing and experiencing in the workplace. I mean, and even nurses going at it with one another. We have got to do better. We're the professionals. We've got to do better. All right. We've got to do better. And that is all I have for you today. Listen, don't let anyone steal your joy, right? When you're going in the workplace, before you even go into the workplace, set your intentions, right? Self-regulate, okay? Self-regulate. Don't be afraid to pull someone to the side in private and have a discussion, right? Without being rude, right? We have to do better. And so that's my topic for today. That's what I wanted to talk about. Remember, our mental health is important, right? And we don't want stress. We want to manage and have little stress as possible, especially when we're in the workplace, right? Because again, most stress is work related, right? We need to manage that because all of these things can have an impact on our health, right? Our mental health, physical health, spiritual health. It can wear you down. And so that's why I wanted to talk about that. All right. So until next time, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Until next time, stay healthy, stay well. Bye for now.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Health Coach for Women with Marsha Roopchand-Walker. If you've enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.